I'm in Tampere, which is Finland's second city. I was here to watch a concert last night, and I've just had an interesting encounter with a Finnish politician, because over here it's the local elections are coming up, and it decides who's going to sit on various town councils. So you can see all the hustings here. And I was just thinking to myself, you know, can you see the guy who's standing up in the jeans there? He's from the kind of far left party. And the idea is just bonkers, isn't it? The basic principle of all of this is that it's going to be really good if you can choose one of these, the one that you dislike least. And what they're going to do is take most of your money that you've earned from you, and then they're going to decide how it's going to be spent. It's just amazing, really, that this system. Look at that one. Like, so the idea that this person is going to be better placed to spend my money on my behalf than I could myself, it's just madness, absolute madness. Anyway, I'll turn the camera. I'll tell you about the encounter. I just had a conversation. I didn't really know who this guy was. I'll turn the camera around again. Can you see the bloke with the kind of funky hair and the beard, centre of the shot? I was talking to him, and he's standing for this party called Kokoomus, which in Finland is it's the probably most like the Conservative Party. I'll just go to somewhere a bit quieter. So at the moment, this Kokoomus party, they're in a coalition with Perussuomalaiset, and they're led by this guy called Petteri Orpo, and he's a World Economic Forum appointee, basically, same as Sanna Marin, who was the previous head of the Finnish government. Also World Economic Forum. So I asked this guy, you know, the one that was in the picture, does he know that Petteri Orpo's a member of the World Economic Forum? And he said yeah, and I asked him, do you know what the World Economic Forum's agenda is? And he said yeah, and he said basically it's free trade and globalization. To which I said, well, they certainly don't believe in free trade. They believe in more regulation of private enterprise, not less. They don't believe in free trade unless that trade's like regulated and controlled by the government. I then sort of tried to get him to. He then said, "Oh, there's no agenda. There's no agenda. That's just a conspiracy theory." And I said to him, "Well, you know, Klaus Schwab has actually written a book called The Great Reset that sets out the World Economic Forum's agenda. So the idea that they don't have an agenda is just not true." And then he gave me the other kind of standard line of, "Oh, it's impossible for there to be an agenda because, you know, it's a conspiracy theory. Too many people would have to be involved." And I basically said to him, "Look, you know, if you think about the VW emissions scandal, surely somebody would have blown the whistle on that. You know, with the development of the atomic bomb just before the end of World War II, some of that would have leaked out surely because people would have had to have known and blah, 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 blah." And I basically said to him, what happens, you see, is that individuals are highly specialised. They don't see the big picture. They're only communicated to on a need-to-know basis. And I then started talking to him about CBDCs and posed him a hypothetical question that, you know, if CBDs were to be introduced and they were to be coupled with a Chinese social credit score system, and that was to be used to regulate what people can and can't do with their own money. For example, you know, to save the planet, limiting the number of flights you can take, or limiting the amount of meat that people can buy. I asked him, would you be in favour of that? And he said, "Oh, of course not." And then I then kind of like sort of pushed him and said, "Well, look, if it was to happen, would you oppose it?" And then what was really, really interesting, he said, "Oh, well, already we have that situation because people aren't allowed to spend their money on illegal drugs." And I basically said to him, look, what we're talking about here is something more fundamental, like the right to choose how you're going to spend the money that you've earned on maybe what type of food you want to eat, or what you want to do in your leisure time, whether you want to travel or not. I asked him whether he had any kids. He said he did. That was the only thing that seemed to register with him. That was the only thing that seemed to break through his programming. He also got a bit angry. I was very, very civil, as I always am in these sorts of situations, because you don't get anywhere with being aggressive with people. But he was getting kind of quite exasperated, basically, because I guess he could see that I knew what the score was. And this guy is quite interesting. This is the question, is that he was one of two things. He either was ignorant and he was just bluffing, that he really didn't know anything about the World Economic Forum. Of course, I mentioned to him about Davos. They all go together there, have meetings. What do they talk about? It's unminuted. Are they just going there to discuss like what type of chocolate biscuits they like best, or is it something more significant than that? And I said to him, look, you need to think about your own family. What type of world do you want to create for your own son or daughter? At the end, I don't know whether I'm being a bit cruel here or not. I don't know. I don't know what's inside this guy's mind. Whether he would actually be okay with authoritarian control, so long as he was the one pulling the levers. But the thing is that this guy probably almost certainly doesn't know is that he's a low-level minion, and it's highly unlikely that he will get anywhere near being influential. He's just going to be a useful idiot, a low-level enabler for them. He's selling himself and his own family into kind of slavery. So quite interesting. In the end, like some meathead. He obviously had some goons there, like protecting him. And I just had to say to this guy, look, we're having a civilized conversation here. Anyway, he kind of turned tail and fled. But I think I'm very glad that I actually had this conversation with him. Very, very glad. And I urge other people to do that too, and just tell these people that try to educate them if they need educating, or at the very least it's important that we tell them that we know and we're not happy about it, but do it in a very respectful and courteous way, because it would have been very easy for me to respond to his anger and aggression with anger and aggression back, and I didn't do that. So yeah, an interesting encounter with politicians, and I kind of urge people to talk to them when you get an opportunity to talk to them face to face. Talk to them. Okay, so that's all I want to say. So God bless.